power or control over another one. Abuse is more than physical violence. It can happen to anyone.
Domestic violence can take many forms, such as physical, verbal, and sexual abuse.
The most difficult form of abuse to identify is emotional or psychological one.
Each day, 3 women die because of sexual abuse.
Imagine you're getting back from school and you encounter a rather friendly face that you don't recognize. You're offered a ride back home and some candy. Keep in mind that you're a 10-year-old who's tired and vulnerable. Do you trust that friendly face, or do you remember that it's never good to talk to people you don't fully recognize? In 2018, over half of the criminal human trafficking cases active in the US were sex trafficking cases involving only children. The vulnerable are attacked, making it hard for them to escape such situations. Trafficking involves 3 steps: the act, the means, and the purpose. One large myth about child trafficking is that trafficking primarily occurs in developing countries. While different trafficking means that it can vary from countries, trafficking happens all over the world, and it's never good to be alone when walking home from school. You should always have someone you trust, and if you're offered something like candy or ice cream or talked to by someone you don't recognize, you should always mention a parental figure or just keep saying no until the person leaves.
People born and raised in developed countries know that they can receive free education. We should not take for granted this opportunity that we have to go to school, college, university, and then receive a diploma and work in a professional job. There are some countries that lack this type of education. Some countries that lack good education are Angola, Gambia, Pakistan, Guinea, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Central African Republic, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger.
Free public education was common in New England, but rare in the South, where most education took place at home with family members or tutors. In the 1800s, Horace Mann of Massachusetts led the Common School movement, which advocated for local property taxes financing public schools. The education which is taught in schools today is the modern education. Modern education teaches about the skills required today, that is, the skills of science of technology, the skills of science of medical science, etc. This type of education also includes written tests to examine if the students are learning properly or not. We still have some things in common, like 20 students sitting in a classroom and raising their hands to talk.
Universal primary education in many emerging states now is a major issue and a sizable problem. And most of those states and countries do not appropriate the sufficient resources and school material, even proper teachers to have proper day-to-day school. People should be treated equally, but that is slowly happening now. But before, many women in the world could not take jobs, couldn't even afford much of a equal payment as men, because it's thought that men are much hardworking than females and women in general, which even this has a connection to the financial problem, even to many other teachers, because without equal treatment and equal teachings to everyone in general, despite the gender, has been a huge problem in the past. And this has led to, as it says here, young girls even dropping out from classes.
Our group has to present freedom of education, the role of religion in education. Many people get targeted in schools for their belief as stereotypical beliefs, and they get bullied for it. Like Muslim and Sikh students who wear like traditional headscarves, or yarmulkes, Jewish people who wear yarmulkes, and they get them forcefully taken off of them for like bullying and intimidation.
Freedom of self-expression. Freedom of expression through clothing. We use fashion to feel empowered and more in touch with our inner selves. It helps with our confidence and reveal our identity. We all have the right to express ourselves freely and hold into our opinions.
Everyone is free to express themselves through fashion using their own style and choice, unless you have a strict uniform policy in your school. Is it right to have a strict uniform policy in your school? Most kids complain about having uniforms being uncomfortable and itchy, which can be very distracting throughout the day. It can lower kids' self-confidence and self-esteem, walking around school constantly worrying if they look bad or itching from cheap material used in uniforms. Everyone should have a right to dress the way they want and be able to express themselves as long as it's appropriate for the environment they're in. Finnish students do not wear uniforms. They come to school with the clothes they feel comfortable and most suited in for them each day. However, this unconventional dress code practice in Finnish learning environment can prove that having no uniform rule is not that bad of an idea. Coming out of the closet is the process by which someone accepts their identity and their gender identity and sexual orientation. If someone comes out to you, respect that they have opened up to you and do your best to accept their feelings. Ask appropriate questions. Ask about confidentiality and reassurance them of your confidence. Treat them the same. Don't use slang terms or offensive language. Tell them they should go to counseling.
Freedom of following your dreams. We all have that feeling sometimes. Like we're stuck at our work or something that we don't like to do it. Living is giving. So when you follow your dreams, you will have something worth sharing with others. Chasing your dreams will develop your courage.
There are some steps when it comes to following your dreams. Dream it, believe it, see it. Tell it, plan it, work it, enjoy it.
So our group made a project about equality in employment and wage. And the first question that we got from this topic was that should women work at paid jobs, care for their families and homes, or do both? So there were some statistics about this. This question was asked to different people, and the statistics that they got was that 61% of the women want to work at paid jobs, and 12% of the women want to do both, so work at their homes and also their jobs. And about men now, 52% of men wanted to work at paid jobs, and 20% of men wanted to do both. So also here's the proportion of working wage women who are employed, and 41% of women are employed, 6% are unemployed, and 53% are outside the labor force. These statistics were got in Albania, and they are almost the same in Balkan region.
So our second question in this topic was the gender gap in the labor force, and especially the participation rates. We can see that the darker colored regions on the world map are those places where we find a larger gap between men and women working in the labor force, and the lighter regions are those where we find a more equal and balanced participation within the labor force.
When we talk about equality in employment and wage, many people tend to think that it's only about women, and that couldn't be more wrong. But to make this inequality better, we can do we can take some precautions, which some of them are to promote the work-family business. Many men and women who are lack any adequate maternity protection. But the next thing is to create more quality jobs, because women are very overrepresented in their works.
It was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris in 10th December of 1948 as a common standard of achievements for all people and all nations. It sets out for the first time fundamental human rights to be recognized over the world, and it has been translated to over 500 languages. Article 19 is the article on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that everyone has the right of freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas to any media regardless of frontiers. The lack of free speech and expression separates industrialized countries from undeveloped nations, which creates a universal disconnect between people of different cultures. Everyone has the right to freedom of speech because it's a fundamental human right. Press freedom and censorship. Censorship threatens the right to life when individuals are murdered, harassed, or imprisoned, when governments take extreme measures against dissidents. Every day, press freedoms are violated upon those who publicly express or disseminate views or images that are critical to the regime. The role of human rights organizations is to drive standards up higher rather than down by helping to prevent and eliminate further government corruption and enabling growth of free speech rights.
The First Amendment provides several right protection. To express idea through speech or the press, to assemble or gather with a group, to protest or for other reason, to ask the government to fix the problems. It also protects the right of religion, belief, and practices.
Kosovo has had a troubled past. With this troubled past, this has caused for Kosovo to have not as much privileges as a lot of other countries. One of these privileges has been the freedom of movement. Like most countries in the world are able to freely move between themselves, or at least with a few little restrictions, but mostly freely, while Kosovo has still been in need for visas and other stuff such that it can move to other countries. The only exception for these rules are Albania, Macedonia, Montenegro, and partially Serbia. But Serbia doesn't accept Kosovian car plates.
We are addressing an issue of freedom of movement through creativity and drawings. For example, we drew a symbol here. That's a Greek symbol, and it represents freedom. We also drew Kosovo in bars because we feel like we're an isolated country which don't have freedom of movement, and it's unfair because we're only allowed to go at 4 countries without a visa. Freedom of movement should be given to everybody without exception.
We drew the breaking chains to represent our freedom because the chains are breaking, we are basically free. These people moving and the airplanes flying, the buses, the helicopters, and the ships represent the ways of we can have the freedom of movement and we can move around. These 2 symbols are different symbols of freedom that we found from different cultures. And in these 2 drawings, we represented flying birds because in a way they are free because nothing is stopping them. And in this one, we represent the birds that are coming out of the cage because they are not being free and there isn't anything stopping them anymore.
Freedom of living the life you want.